HPTI adjustment is about stress levels and how much stress people can handle. So everyone has different levels of stress that they can manage. Everyone has different things that worry them, concern them, that create anxiety in their lives or in their work. But some people have a much greater resistance to what will actually cause stress. So for some people, most things, even kind of minor irritations, annoyances, difficulties, do cause stress. It's a natural process. Stress is a natural biological response to threat in the environment. So it's not something that you can stop. You can't eliminate stress. It's something that you can figure out how to deal with, how to manage, and what level of stress you can manage in your work. So if for someone with lower adjustment, they tend to have a lot more worries, a lot more concerns, a lot more things that bother them in their day-to-day life or work. And the thing about that is it's knowing how to deal with that, knowing how to manage it. And in some cases, a bit of stress can be good, especially when stress is alerting you to a problem that can be solved. Right, so if we think of stress as a biological adaptation to a threat in the environment, are you doing something to deal with that threat? Right, if you're talking about, say, an operational manager who has all sorts of things that could go wrong in their workplace, right? There's health and safety issues, there's maybe legal issues, there's things that they need to worry about, there's, balancing different stakeholders and unions and management and HR and all of these different things that could cause problems potentially in the workplace. But if you can think about these potential problems ahead of time and deal with them, then you're averting bigger crises later, farther down the road. So people who are very vigilant and aware and sensitive to stress in the workplace can sometimes make really good use of that, right? To make sure that they're worrying about stuff, but then they're solving the problems that they're worrying about. And often people who manage their stress adaptively are really good at identifying the source of stress and then figuring out a strategy for how to deal with that. And in the workplace, for people who can identify potential stress sources, potential threats in the workplace, and then sort them out, deal with them, manage them before they become a big problem, that can be a huge asset. The challenge is for people with lower levels of adjustment who get put in positions or end up getting into positions where there's more stress that they can manage. And in these really stressful, really highly demanding positions, we see higher adjustment levels as a huge advantage. Because if you have a really high adjustment level, so you're much less sensitive to stress, you worry about fewer things, you're less prone to anxiety, it takes a much bigger problem or a much bigger stressor to actually feel those negative emotions or consequences, which are, worry, anxiety, concern, any of that. So with leadership, we see adjustment as a really important contributor to success in leadership, because as you get into more senior leadership positions, the stressors get bigger, more difficult, more challenging, and more frequent in many cases. So a really senior leader is not just someone who has to take on a lot of stress, has to deal with a lot of potential problems and threats and difficulties, but in many cases, they're the person who everyone else puts their stress onto. Right? If they're a good leader, people will come to them with the problems or the threats or the difficulties and say, here's what's going on, here's the problem. And so someone in a leadership position, especially a senior leadership position, needs to be able to manage it, deal with it, and to be able to do it in a relatively calm way so as not to spread their stress among everyone else. So the more challenging and difficult the position is, the more higher adjustment levels are an advantage to performance in that position. Right? So if it's really challenging, really demanding, and there's going to be constant stress, someone who is very susceptible to stress is really going to struggle in that position. That's not to say they can't do it, or they don't have the capacity, or the skills and intellect and other personality traits that'll make them succeed in that role. But if they can't manage their own stress, and if it overwhelms them, they're not going to be effective in that role, and they're not going to be happy in that role. But the thing is, you can't change your stress levels necessarily. You can't change your adjustment levels. But you can change how you cope with that stress. If you can find adaptive ways of coping with stress, of managing stress, then often you can manage more stressful positions if you've got ways to work with that, right? So the good example of that is if there's threats in your workplace, but you solve them. If you have the capability to deal with and manage the problems, if you have the tools, resources, organizational support to deal with problems or threats in the environment and the workplace before they become too serious, then usually that's fine and you can manage and deal with those before they get to be overwhelming. But if you put someone with really low adjustment in a really demanding, stressful position that they don't have the capability to manage, it's going to instantly and very quickly be overwhelming. So one of the things with looking at kind of success and performance and stress levels or adjustment levels is you need to make sure that the demands of the position aren't overwhelming someone's stress threshold, and that they've got all the other tools, capabilities, intelligence, knowledge that they need to deal with the stuff in their role. Otherwise, it's going to be much more stressful. But also there is kind of a responsibility for people to understand what levels of stress that they can manage, understand what coping mechanisms they can use to deal with stress, and then make sure that they're getting into a position and roles and responsibilities that is commensurate with the amount of stress that they can manage and deal with effectively.